So what do you do day to day? I'm actually really curious. My first degree was in composition, so I've been in the trenches.
Oh,
So I'm curious what your kind of daily schedule as a composer is.
the day-to-day schedule of this composer, I can't speak for all the rest, but I can guess it's similar, is ever changing.
Yeah.
I could tell you what it's been today. I could
Yeah.
tell you what it was yesterday. I have no idea what tomorrow is. I'm in the middle of finishing up a job, a theme park show, and it records next week in Nashville. I won't be there for it. I'll be like this.
Yeah.
um, and so we're in the final stages of checking the scores for the music prep folks to make sure it's all together. And I'm down to the last chart. In fact, when we get off this, I'll probably do the last chart, and that will be that.
Yeah.
Uh, Yesterday, I was finishing prelays for this same session. Prelays being any kind of synthesizer sounds or things that I'm
Okay.
providing, the click, the production type things.
Hmm.
So that was yesterday, and yesterday was Monday. Sunday, I honestly, I didn't have to work too much. I played tennis
Good.
Sunday morning, right? So that was that, and oh, and I do practice the piano a few days a week. That's one thing this pandemic has brought me is some uh, time to practice. Time where I wasn't going anywhere, and so I managed to get my hands back together a little bit. Which, you know what, I don't pretend to be a real pianist, but it helps my programming when I'm programming synthesizers and doing work on the computer. It gives me a more, I guess I have more weapons because I can move a little faster, play a little more delicately, and it reduces the editing I ultimately have to do on certain things.
So are
So,
you playing in a lot of things on a MIDI keyboard?
well, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't step in very much unless it's a very difficult passage. That's where you would go, a note at a time at whatever pace you want, and you get assign it the rhythm. I uh, if before I would do that, I would slow the tempo down and play it if it's that difficult. But usually I get pretty close. And they've always said that composers can make their mistakes in private,
Yeah.
and it's absolutely true. No one will ever know because I'm going to fix it before it's ever heard by
Yeah.
another human being. So, it depends on what stage of a project I'm in, and if it's the creative stage, I'll do anything. But to distract myself from focusing too much on something. At the same time, if it's a particular style of music, I'll try to reference all kinds of examples of that. Sometimes my clients will provide me with
Mm.
a description of what they're looking for, and if they really mean it, and I usually take them seriously. I'll try to get that sound in my head, and also try to figure out what makes that particular style work for them, and then try to work that into my writing and creative thinking. There, there's all kinds of ways to get things going and spend your time practically. I tend not in the evenings. I don't work too many evenings these days, but when I used to, and if I have to now, I'll make sure that that's not critical detail work,
Okay.
because you get tired, and it's easy for mistakes to creep in. I don't mind doing concept work in the evenings. That's actually a good time to do it because you're you need to be free to think the thoughts, or let the thoughts find their way in, and not try to control them and manipulate them. And if you study composition, like you said you have, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm.
You look under every rock for the ideas, and hope they come, and if they don't, you have to go conjure them.
Yeah. Yeah, but I always found then once the idea comes, then it's easy. It's
Mhm.
easy to finish it out. The hard part for me was always finding that initial idea that would lead the rest of it.
Okay, you're right, but then there's the challenges of form. How are you going to let that play out? That
Yeah.
idea develop and play out, and boy, and these days with computers, you can try it all different
Yeah.
ways. second guess yourself, come back, try it that way again. No, I didn't like that. That's why. Oh, and then go off here for an hour. No, I don't like that either, and go back to the. It's a little dangerous having all the tools we have now, because it can just give you too many options.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Are you playing guitar as well? I see just a couple of guitars behind you.
I just like the way they decorate the room.
Yeah, yeah, they look nice.
Years and years ago, I started out as a rock and roll guitar player and played in bands, and it was kind of my first love. The Beatles had come to this country, and I was a little boy. And by the way, I thought insects were coming to invade the country. And said the Beatles are coming. So it turned out to be not insects, but the Beatles. And so I took a shining to rock and roll bands, and therefore learned guitar, and enjoyed that immensely for years and years and years. So every now and then I'll be working on a project that calls for something more guitar oriented. And we were just talking about, how do you write music? Well, what do you do? And sometimes I'll try to develop ideas on guitar, because it limits the scope, because I have limited abilities on guitar, which is sometimes very good for certain pieces of music. And I can't overcomplicate it if I can't play it. So I use it as a bit of a control on what I write. But it's inspiring. And likewise, if I'm writing a piece that is piano dominant, well, I'll go over there and plink around. Mm-hmm. But we all know that the best ideas come away from the instruments.
Yeah.
I'll bet you agree with me on that one.
Yep.
Unless you're a virtuoso player that just can freely let your thoughts come right out of your creative mind into your fingers. Yeah,
not over here.
Yeah. Well, not many people can, but you don't want to limit it in any way. So the most genuine creative thoughts come when we're out walking our dogs.
Oh yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
So or not even thinking about music. The shower seems to work.
Yeah. Or watching a movie, or just trying to go to sleep.
Well, with a movie though, you have the distraction of the score.
Yeah. Unless it's not a very good score.
Well, then what do you mute the sound and just watch the visuals?
No. I'm just joking.
Okay. Well, feel free to do that. It's fine with me.
Maybe I'll try that. Maybe I'll try just watching a movie.
Hey, according to your bio, you watch horror movies while doing yoga.
I do. I get kind of restless, like sitting. We watch a lot of horror movies, and I get restless sitting for so long. So I'll get down on the floor and I'll do some stretches in the kind of in the downtime between the intense sections.
Oh, okay. Because I was thinking, doing both those things at the same time is kind of polarizing, right? Because you have the intensity of the horror movie and the relaxation of the yoga and your breathing and all that. And I'm thinking, wow.
And yeah, it is nice in its own way, because you get really worked up, and when you're watching a horror movie, you can feel your heart just going crazy. But then if you're on the ground doing a deep stretch and just breathing through it, it's thanks for reading my bio.
Well, we met, and I hadn't heard a lot about you. I knew you had studied with Wes, Maestro Wes Kenny, and I guess I wanted to know more before we talked in depth today. By the way, horror movies are really fun to write scores for.
Oh yeah, how much have you done?
Just honestly, short films in that genre, and not many. But it's fun. It's because you get to write wacky. You get to use some of those 20th century techniques that you studied.
It can be very sound rather than melody or harmony driven.
And very often, I just recently read that someone who's done a lot of horror scores, Jay Chataway, film score, he commented that horror movies don't always have the most dialogue.
Yeah, you're right.
A lot of times it's you're sneaking around or something's going to happen. Suspense is building. The music gets space to be heard. Also, the music participates very much as a functioning part of the plot, or in some ways a character.
Yeah.
So horror music is a gas, and
Yeah. It's a lot of, it's part of the atmosphere. It's part of the visuals, more than it's part of the narrative. Or yeah, it's really critical. I didn't think about how important that is because it's so just a normal part of what I consume. But
mm,
yeah, I think look at it differently next time I sit down.
take a listen the next time you listen to Halloween. Watch Halloween.
Oh, I mean Halloween, yeah, of course. And The Exorcist. Right.
Oh boy.
It's good. It's good stuff. I recently watched The Empty Man,
Mm.
and that was one of the ones where I came away like I pulled the score up on Spotify and I started listening to it again. It was so upsetting. Just the music was. It was like I'm glad we stuck through it, but like the music was so effective and upsetting, we almost turned it off. Just it was perfect.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
perfect enough that I told people about it the next
yeah,
day.
I see.
Yeah,
It was perfectly upsetting.
it was exactly what the movie. It was exactly what it needed to be.
Got it.
So Greg, you write a lot of different things for a lot of different people. Could you kind of give us an overview of what are the different kind of types of projects that you do?
Oh, well, over the years, I've done a little bit of everything. I am an equal opportunity composer, and that if you need music, I'm your guy. But I like I'm severely eclectic. I used to speak of myself that way, and it sounds derogatory, but it's actually a good thing for me. There's a lot of variety in the kind of opportunities I've had. And if I'm not that familiar with it, I generally find out, it gives me something to learn and explore. But when you get right down to it, it's music, and it serves a purpose usually.
Mhm.
Um, I think one of my biggest challenges is actually when it's music for music's sake, and that would apply to concert work,
Yeah.
where you have a captive audience that's seated there, and they're listening to an orchestra play music, and there's no visual, there's nobody singing usually, uh, so it's all you, and I find that to be a little more challenging than other stuff. I love to participate on projects that have a dramatic have a dramatic component to it, and especially if it has a narrative.
Yeah.
I love stories,
Mhm.
and so I like to participate in stories.
Mhm.
And I remember I used to work a little bit. Well, I worked for years on the Star Trek TV shows as the gentleman I just mentioned, Jay Chataway's assistant, and I do his overflow orchestration. I eventually wrote a few episodes myself too, which was really wonderful to do, and I really enjoyed it. But I felt after completing an episode that there should be some sort of party. Like, okay, the cast should come over. We should celebrate this because we just participated in this dramatic event. If you've been involved with shows, I take it, and
Yeah.
when it's over, you have the wrap party, and you put closure on what was probably a very enjoyable creative event. And it doesn't happen with TV shows because the cast is 3 weeks ahead of you on the next episode, and nobody's left by the time you're done with your stuff. And
Yeah.
and I felt empty. I felt, wait a minute, I just participated in their performances on here. Shouldn't we all at least meet or toast this? Or so that I missed that, but I really really enjoy working on narrative things, which, believe it or not, I know you're familiar with my educational concert works,
Mhm.
uh, because you assist Wes, and uh, believe it or not, there's stories in those too.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
it's sort of what gets me through them.
Mhm.
If we could talk about the educational works a little bit, because that's what my Fort Collins experiences have been for almost exclusively. If I have to write an educational concert work, of course it has to have some sort of educational value. That goes without saying. But I've always been sensitive to coming across as teachy to the students, who for them, their trip to the orchestra, it should be an enjoyable experience for them. It should be fun. Yeah. And I don't want them to get there and find out it's just another classroom experience, albeit a really big classroom with an orchestra playing. So I've always felt very strongly about not talking down to them. This is an oboe. I don't want it to be that. I never want it to be that. And so I tried to structure my pieces. There are 8 full-length ones in all at this point, and 2 short ones. But the longer ones, I make sure that there's some sort of narrative thread through it so that I can hang the education on that. And also, if there's a story to it, I can also probably more successfully insert some humor into it. And if you keep it light and you keep it humorous, they might not notice that you're trying to teach them something. And I think I like the idea of them learning that way rather than having it shoved down their throats or being condescended to or anything like that. So even my point is, even with educational works, I'm dealing with a dramatic situation with a story, and it feels pretty good to me.
Yeah. So let's double click on that and talk about the animated orchestra. Could you talk, like, what's the story of the animated orchestra for our listeners and watchers? And then maybe we can talk about some of the narrative elements and what the audience is learning and what's really fun about that piece.
Okay. Then can I cover some of the history of the piece?
Absolutely. Yeah, please do.
It's important for why it is what it is.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, this is the 10th year anniversary of the work, which blows my mind because I remember when I was writing it and the conditions of that time, and I can't believe it's 10 years later. But boy, I didn't, in the beginning, I was in New York before I had ever written an educational concert work. I didn't know what a YPC was. A YPC is young person's concert work. You know that, but for everyone else, that's what it is. And a conductor friend of mine who had actually worked as a violinist on sessions with me, she was a contractor and she played concertmaster on my sessions, and was a good friend and had a lot to do with putting me in contact with music houses that would hire composers, arrangers. It was a very nice symbiotic relationship. And she was pursuing conducting at the time, along with her violin playing. And she was starting to get some attention as a conductor. So those first jobs as conductors, you know very well, you go out with an orchestra and they usually they assign you the associate conductor type work or assistant conductor type work, pops concerts, educational concerts, family concerts. And she had been doing a number of those. And she said, Greg, I'm tired of programming Peter and the Wolf and Young Person's Guide. They're wonderful pieces, but I'm doing them all over the place. And why don't you, if you write one, and she had stepped into a music directorship with the Eugene Symphony. And she said, if you write one, I'll perform it 2 times next fall. And this was early in the winter. And that conductor has gone on to have a pretty magnificent career, and that's Maren Alsop, who she's kind of legendary at this point, in many ways. So it's been a nice ride. But she was the first one that said, "This, you should do this," and I said, "Of course I will. I'll do it. To have an orchestra play my music, that's the biggest honor I know." And so I agreed, and then I said, "What's a YPC?" What is a young person's concert work? What's it supposed to do? So she filled me in a little bit and turned me loose. And they say that writers should always write what they know. Well, I'm curious, what did she tell you when you asked when she explained it to you? What did she tell you? It's like Peter and the Wolf. There's a narration, and it needs to teach some elements of music. And she kept it pretty basic. And then she kind of said, "I'm sure you'll do fine." She did one of those. And I said, so I decided to write about what I knew at the time. And that was how I wrote music. I'm not saying how composers write music. I mean, who knew more about how I wrote music than me? So I made it about that. And that was Mr. Smith's composition. And it was about the process of composing music. And we went out, we premiered it, and it went pretty well. And the performances started to come in from other orchestras, because you conductors, you talk to each other. And it had gotten around that there was this new educational concert work, and it caught on pretty well. And just to stop for a moment, it's called Mr. Smith's Composition for a couple of important reasons. First of all, that's my name, Smith. But maybe the more important reason is that it was a generic American sounding name. Mm. That was important. And here's why. I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Salem, Ohio. Great town. But I had a bit of an inferiority complex about the bigger world, the bigger musical world. And I thought in order to compose music, you had to have a European sounding name, or you had to be dead, which of course composers were alive when they wrote their music. Maybe except for Schumann. That's a whole nother story. So I named it that as sort of a way to tell anybody, any of these young emerging audience members, these kids, that they were entitled to write music if they wanted to. They'd have to, of course, pursue it and study it, but don't think of yourself as not entitled to have a shot at it. And it was an invitation. So I like that. Okay, so let's I got to move you forward so I can explain about the Animated Orchestra. So Mary and I, we started doing some concerts together, and one of the concerts she dreamed up, she loved cartoons, she loved animation music. See where I'm going with this. And she had scheduled this concert, and she got a Scott Bradley score to a Tom and Jerry cartoon, and the orchestra's playing the music, and she was timing it to the screen, which is hard to do because cartoon music is usually done in 1 minute increments. It's very technically difficult to play. But Maren wanted to do it with the live orchestra to the film, and she asked me, I was narrating something else for her on the concert. She said, why don't you do the dog sounds, and when there's not many sounds, and there's not much dialogue in those cartoons, but she needed someone to cover the sound effects, so she had me do it. And it was silly and stupid, but I really liked it. I've always liked animation music. And so I parked that aside. 20 years go by, whatever it is. Maren became the music director at the Cabrillo Festival of Contemporary Music in Santa Cruz, California. And they do contemporary music of usually living composers. And I was very often on their Sunday family concert, either premiering a new educational concert work, or they would program another one of mine. But Maren actually commissioned several of my works. So very often they were premieres with her. And about 10 years ago, the festival was having its 50th anniversary. And Maren was the music director, and I think she had 5 years left before she ended it. And so I thought, boy, this would be an appropriate time to embrace the animation style of music. And the animation style of music that we all know is Warner Brothers cartoons, the Bugs Bunny, Donald Duck, not wrong one, Daffy Duck. Wrong company. And Tom and Jerry cartoons, really brilliant animation music. And then I remember that experience I had with Maren. I thought this is especially appropriate. So I was troubled by the fact that if I wanted to write animation music, it might require a picture, a cartoon. Well, if there's a really worthy cartoon out there that I could write music for, it would already have music. So that didn't work. And I thought, if I want to get other performances of this piece, and it requires projecting a cartoon on a screen, that's going to be a barrier.
Yeah.
So I tried to figure out a way to have my cake and eat it too. And the way seemed to be, and I don't know if you want me to give away the plot of this, but I think we can talk about it.
Yeah.
It's no great loss, for I know this going in, but then as the narrator, I come out as the composer. I said, I'd like to play the music that I wrote for this cartoon and have the orchestra play it. And there's just this one problem, that the cartoon isn't here. And for some reason, it was sent to the wrong place. Port Collins instead of Port
Yeah.
Collins, right? Whatever the case may be. So the cartoon isn't here. So I have to indulge the audience, and I do that by saying, what if I describe the scenes, the orchestra plays the music, and you imagine what happens in the cartoon? So that's where the backbone, the educational backbone of the piece comes into play. They have to use their imaginations to imagine what the music is describing, and that I've also described with the narration, so that they know that this is going to happen. The music is played, and they can imagine what it looks like on the screen that isn't projecting, that has no projections on it. So that's the crux of the piece. And it's the cartoon story, which I don't think I need to cover. The story of the cartoon is a kind of a believable tale. Like if you were watching a Warner Brothers cartoon, this makes sense that this would happen. There's an animal, there's something goes wrong, and then this happens and that happens. And by the end of the piece, in order to reenact more visually what happened in the cartoon, we also indulge the orchestra players to participate. And things get a little wacky when you ask musicians to do extra musical things, and that works. And the funny thing is, when they don't do it well, that's funny.
It's funny.
And when they do it well, that works too. And it's surprising how well they do and how quickly they volunteer for some of the craziness.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know I don't know if you were there when we did it once before in Fort Collins. I don't know if you were part of that, but
I wasn't there when you narrated it.
There was a right, of course. There is a I think it's a singular moment. I'm going to take credit for it. The first orchestral wave ever executed.
Yeah,
I'm going to take it. I dare someone to challenge me. Anyway, it's a lot of fun, and when we premiered it, first of all, Marin really dug it. That made me happy. She and we walked off the stage, and the crowd was still clapping. It felt really good. The orchestra was on their feet, and they were smiling. The audience was I think they were on their feet, but they were happy. Everybody's happy, and it occurred to me what I like most about it, that the line between audience, orchestra, and in this case, the narrator, was blurred.
Yeah,
we were all one and the same, because it does require, and there's a very important audience participation device. So everybody was in on it. Everybody was part of the act, and I've taken that very seriously. And I've written a piece since then, which you're familiar with, Vibe, that capitalizes on the audience too. It's just it's too wonderful a moment to miss, and I really enjoy it when they embrace it. I really do.
What I love about Animated Orchestra, I mean, it's besides how good the music is and besides how fun it is that you don't just ask the audience to interact physically, but you're actually giving them direction on how to listen to it, which is just something that we don't ever talk about. So it's about 30-ish minutes long, right? It doesn't feel like you're sitting down and watching a 30-minute symphony, because you've got all this, engagement, and there's things that they're imagining, and then they listen to it with the music and they create it in their mind. So I love how interactive it is on a listening level, and then plus the physical interaction.
Well, thank you. And it's interesting. I don't do formal market research on this, but what usually happens, the teachers who attend the educational concerts have their students. I think the orchestra might even distribute questionnaires. And anyway, the kids are asked what they like best, what happened here, and very often they're sent on to me in large packages. By the way, there's a lot of them. And when I see someone say something about late in the piece, make a reference to something that happened later in the work, or make a connection with something that happened earlier and later, and got it, that's when I know that they're paying attention. Otherwise, they wouldn't know that. It's a perfect indicator that they're paying attention. And it's my worst nightmare to be narrating on stage and look down and seeing a kid like this.
Yeah.
Sleeping. And, granted, there's all kinds of situations out there for these kids that they're going through. But I feel bad about that. And I also feel a little challenged. Like, I want to go, look, it's a tuba. All right.
Yeah.
We can't single out any one person, but sometimes I would like to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But it's fun. Do you think I enjoy this stuff?
It seems like it. Well, and some of the most memorable moments, like you were talking about, asking the orchestra to do things they're not used to doing, are in the second half of that piece.
Yes, the reenactment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And all the orchestra members love to share the funny things written in their music that they don't usually get to see. It's not notes and rhythms, it's instructions, like stand up and stomp on the ground. And
right. And we all know what they're trying to stomp, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we do.
Mm-hmm.
We do. And how fortunate for me, I found the perfect animal for our lead character.
Mm-hmm.
A ferret. I almost wrote myself into a corner not having that to turn to. And then I did some research, and ferrets are kind of like, they're like I describe in the piece. They are that curious, and they dance that weasel war dance. That's for real. I didn't make that up. That's absolutely the case. Look at the videos, and they bounce around, and they like to get into tight places like brass instruments. They do. They really like to go into close quarters.
That's fascinating.
I really lucked out with that little guy.
Yeah,
I really did. Really did.
I'll find some ferret facts and share them on our website.
By all means.
Mm-hmm.
Very underrated animal.
Yeah. And then this newer piece, Shave and a Haircut. Could you talk about that a bit? That was a very interactive.
Yes. Well, Shave and a Haircut, for those that recognize the title, it's Shave and a Haircut, 2 bits, which a lot of us have known and played around with over the years. I remember my brother and I used to just go crazy with it, through the wall.
We just watched Who Framed Roger Rabbit a couple of weeks ago, and there's a Shave and a Haircut scene in that.
By the way, that's a great score. That's a good anime score. So I take advantage of that, and instead of the answer, the orchestra plays that ba 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 ba, and the audience is indulged to go many, many, many times.
Mm-hmm.
And we get a little more subtle with it. Sometimes it's loud. Sometimes they're called upon to do it softer. And in between, if they're that sensitive. But that was a piece I wrote during the quarantine.
Mm-hmm.
I was wanted something to keep busy with, and you guys premiered it. You premiered it. Last year, I think. So I've revised it since then.
Oh, okay.
Right.
Remind me to ask you for a new score, because I still have the old one.
Yeah, it's not valid. Formally, it's still intact.
Okay.
Almost. I'll send you the score. I promise. That's right. You were part of that. We were communicating then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah.
Weird times.
Very strange times. And we also thought about doing that piece for when you guys were doing the drive-in theater.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In fact, Wes, it was too short a notice. I couldn't finish it in time, but in which case we would do it with car horns.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. So maybe that will be somewhere in the future. But it's a short little 3.5 minute piece, something like that. That really beats up hard on the da 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 da. So not much more to say about that. But if it's done successfully, then they've spent 3.5 minutes listening for a real, not always clear cue, because sometimes it's buried in the texture of the orchestra, so they have to listen for it. So they'll do some intense listening, and it's a really good training, a real good hearing training exercise, I think.
Yeah. So one of my questions was when and why did you start writing these educational pieces or these pieces for younger audiences? Did it start with that piece you wrote for Marin?
Yes,
Okay.
right. That's where it started, and it kicked into gear right away. I came back from the premiere, and I had before I knew it, I had 20 performances lined up, and I could see it, and it felt good too.
Yeah.
It was a good fit for me. It had the dramatic thing going for it. There was a story, and the other part that worked very well for me. I already sort of suggested that Marin didn't over control me on it. She said, "Let's go do it." And everything else I was doing at that moment was producers and directors and commercials and news packs. Everybody was telling me what to do, and
Yeah.
I was used to it, and that's fine. But on this particular project, I could, I collect some questions and ask Marin every now and then. What's the standard instrumentation? What should I do? Or just general questions like that. But other than that, I was free to do it myself. I was composer and critic, and I'm pretty good at the critic part. And it was just it felt very freeing.
Yeah.
And off we went to the premiere. We did it, and it succeeded, and made a few changes, and few years later wrote another one. Every couple of years, 3 years or so, I write another one. I can't blast them out. They really do take a while,
Yeah.
because I'm a writer of music, not necessarily a writer of stories. So dialogue and storylines, things like that, I'm not particularly facile with.
Mhm.
I think I do okay with it, but they're all narrow. It's not Dostoevsky or anything. So
Was Vibe the last one? The most
well,
recent one?
Shave is the most recent one, but
Yeah.
sure. Vibe is a very full length, more of a science piece
Yeah.
that combines science with music, and that was probably the most difficult one I've written, because I realized I'm I'm instructing in science now. It's one thing for me to tell them about whole notes, half notes, and pitches and things and rhythm, but for me to start instructing about science and the principles of acoustics, which is really what it was, how sound works and echoes and all kinds of things, and solids, liquids, how gases, how sound behaves in different mediums. I knew I had to get it right.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be a bunch of teachers in the audience that would mind. And I felt the responsibility. So besides the musical aspect of it, I also had to button up the factual aspect, and then piece it together. So it was a big challenge. You were with me when we mounted that.
Yeah,
And,
that was when we met for
right.
the first time.
If you had weighed me before and after, I was lighter after.
Yeah.
I promise you, it was pretty rigorous, and I was working from memory. So
Oh, that's right.
it's one thing to be the composer. You geek out on the notes you've written, and you want to button them up and make sure they're right. But when you're listening as the composer and trying to remember the next doggone line, it's a little challenging. You need a lobotomy, and then you can maybe do both. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, as a composer, like you hinted, you're kind of listening and wanting to maybe adjust things. Was that kind of getting in the way? Could you not shut that off? Because I don't think I'd be able to.
No, I couldn't shut it off. And in fact, when I started to do educational concert works, it was always such a gift when the conductor's rehearsal technique included a run through that didn't include the narrator. And some of them will do that. They'll learn the notes, right? And then they'll say, "What? Okay, come up and do the narration, Greg." So I go to the middle of the audience, and I sit there and I listen. Wow, I get to hear my music. And one of the first ones I did after the premiere with Marin and Eugene of Mr. Smith was with the Cincinnati Symphony, and good bunch. And they had everybody. It was full sections. And I walked down on stage, started narrating. I didn't want to talk. I just wanted to stop talking and start listening, because I was surrounded by full string sections and really fine players everywhere. And it was, I don't know. I wish I just shut up. That guy would stop talking. Of course,
Yeah.
it's not about me.
Yeah, for those who are listening who haven't seen a concert with Greg narrating, it's the pieces are about 30-ish minutes, and you're not just narrating, you're acting as well. You're leading the audience, and you're doing it all from memory.
Well,
It's a lot, right?
Well, I have the benefit of having written the piece.
Yeah, that does help.
And just to say how that works. Well, you're right. And we were talking about computers. I work in a sequencer, a digital audio workstation where if I draft something out with piano sound and I have a line in mind, I'm trying the line against the music I'm drafting. And so by the time I've orchestrated that, I probably said that line many, many times and changed it many, many times. So they were birthed together. The music and the words were birthed at the same time. So I really should have it by memory. Now the acting thing, it's very often it's just me talking to him, like I'm talking to you now. And if you were in my living room, I'm just telling you about music. That's kind of the way I want it to come across.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few pieces, major, minor, mystery, where it's really acting even with a little bit of singing. I sing a little bit in vibe, but you could get away with singing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there's a lot of acting in vibe. I think that's kind of me telling them about science. But some of the other ones might get a little more involved on the acting side.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's fun. I'm very, very, very fortunate.
Yep. Is there anything else about your music you wanted to share? I had a couple more general questions about you.
Why don't you fire away with your questions?
So what do you like to do outside of music? So this is always a fun one with musicians.
I think that's a good question, because I always wonder when I meet other composers.
Yeah.
And, I've been on panels with other composers, and I want someone to ask them, find out what they do. They go bowling or what? And just a quick story. I was at the Cabrillo Festival. I was one of the visiting composers, and they usually bring in a lot of composers. So I'm standing out in the street, and a volunteer comes up to me, and she recognized me as a visiting composer, and she said, "So I know you're a composer, but what are you a musician too?" And honestly, I wanted to say something kind of clever. I couldn't. I was, it took me by surprise. And so she saw me pause, and she goes, "When you're not writing music, what do you play?" And I looked at her and I said, "Tennis." So that's the answer to your question. I play a lot of tennis.
A lot of tennis.
I love tennis and playing the night. So I do that. I have a couple dogs that need walking every now and then.
Always a good break from whatever you're working on.
Yeah, I'll confess to having a little garden, but I only like to grow things I can eat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at the pretty stuff, but I can grow some decent vegetables and herbs, spices. Let's see. That's about it. I have grown sons, and now thankfully one of them has provided a granddaughter. So
congratulations.
So for the longest time I was a parent. Now I'm a grandparent. So I lead a full life, and music is never far away from my thinking. I've been watching a lot of shows. There's a lot of great scoring getting done on series on Netflix and Hulu, and there's a lot of really fine stuff being done.
What's a recent favorite?
Well,
what do you want to share? What should we go listen to after we listen to this?
If you're speaking musically or just appealing, I watch some of the mainstream things, the Succession, and these aren't good for the kids though. But we got into a series that's somewhat older, Outlander, and I love the score to that. Bear McCreary scored that and made some great choices. And what I see again and again and again in the scoring that goes out is a lot of good simplicity, and not always full harmonies and not fully blown music, but effective scoring music. And I'm old enough to have written the older style where there were a lot of notes going on. There were lots of, if you wrote a tension, it could be a cluster of notes, and you would find acoustic ways to make what they now do with synthesized sounds. Jerry Goldsmith would write some very inventive stuff. But now you can really accomplish quite a lot with what I'm surrounded with here. I'll confess to it too. Bunch of computers and synthesizers, and I like that. But I nothing makes me happier than live instruments. Yeah. I love it, and I've said it, and I still mean it. That I have the older I get, the fewer heroes I have. But the orchestra is still my hero, and which is why coming to see you guys and get on stage with the Fort Collins Symphony is such a privilege and a pleasure, and to be up there with Wes Kenny. Wes Kenny's an old friend of mine. I met him early on when Marin was doing my pieces at the Cabrillo Festival. We've been friends ever since. And the thing is, Wes has musical theater chops too, and opera. And so if I'm working, see, my pieces aren't hard to play. I hope you'll agree with me. I don't think the notes themselves are particularly hard to play. It's when to play them, because it has to cue with the narration, and that's all about conductor narrator. So it really helps to have someone with some theater skills to help us make the cues happen, to make the dramatic stuff unfold in the most effective way for the audience. But along with that and once again, I have to give credit to the Fort Collins Symphony. I need willingness from those musicians to get a little goofy, because I have to admit, I haven't had many bad experiences with orchestras, but there are orchestras that aren't as willing to do the crazy stuff, the extra musical stuff. Fort Collins is very willing, and that really helps me. Otherwise, I get hung out. I'm up there trying to construct a little vignette or a laugh, and as the narrator, if it doesn't come, if I need a reaction from someone and it doesn't come, well, then it's not going to land and be as effective, and it makes me sweat a little. I start to lose more weight. See, it's just not. But it's always a fun time. I've been with you guys a lot of times. I'm certain I want to add them up, the number of concerts we've done. But it's been a gas. I even know my way around town a little bit. I like Fort Collins a lot. Yeah. A lot.
Well, we as an orchestra are always happy to have you there. The orchestra loves having you there. I love it whenever we get to do one of your pieces, and so
I appreciate that a lot. I always like to think if we're doing these concerts and we're not having fun, we're doing something wrong. Yeah. You agree?
Well, yeah, and that's part of it, is that the music is just so fun. It's fun for us. It's fun for the audience. It's just it's a good time all around.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your sentiment.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today.
Sure, it's my pleasure, Jeremy. I'm very happy you're with the orchestra doing this now. This is a nice operation you guys have going on. It's a pleasure to be involved.
Absolutely. Well, again, like I said, we're always happy to have you here.
I hope to see you real soon, Jeremy.
Very soon.